Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. Welcome back to Swarajya Conversations with Sharan Sethi. I'm your host, and today I'm very privileged to be joined by our editorial director for Swarajya, R. Jagannathan. Sir, thank you so much. A very good evening to you. Thank you for giving us your time for this conversation, sir.
My pleasure, Sharon.
We've been watching this very interesting development, and I think somewhat many people, including you, foresaw this happening before as well. So, first of all, what are your observations on how exactly this has happened? Because obviously, there were intentions coming from both sides of the spectrum that certain media houses are creating some sort of a ruckus in their opinion. And in that sense, the talks about acquisition was going on. But now the entire angle of a hostile takeover is being portrayed. So, how do you see this going forward?
See, there are two things, two angles to this. One is that this is a good time for the company to find a strong financial partner because after a long time, for the last 18 months or so, 7 or 8 quarters, they've been in profits. So it's a good time in terms of their valuations. So in terms of their own internal dynamics, they might have considered inducting a partner. But of course, if the current promoters had an idea about what kind of partner they want, it might be quite different from the Adanis. So, but the Adanis might have forced the issue by by buying up a company in which there were warrants that could be converted into shares, and they quickly converted it, and they have announced an open bid. So basically, they have jumped the gun to make sure that no other partner is suddenly inducted without them putting in a contested bid. So that's what the yesterday's notice to the stock exchange said from the NDTV side, that they didn't know that this was going to happen. Okay, so that's one part
Yeah.
of it. Second thing is, I think the long-term viability of this business has always been a problem. Okay, the fact that post-pandemic all media houses are doing much better in the last 6 to 8 quarters is because there is a pent-up demand for durables, goods, and the ads are coming through. So they are looking a little better, but it is not the same. What the short-term profitability is not the same as long-term one. So the fundamental viability of the media business has always been in doubt. So sooner or later, you need some either a trust fund or a benevolent investor, something like a Jeff Bezos in Washington Post, who has private wealth which can support a media organization, or you will get corporate houses getting into it. Almost all major media houses now have corporate investment. Even NDTV actually had corporate investment. I mean, covertly but not overtly. I mean, at the various points, Nahata and who is linked to Reliance and various other guy, India Bulls, again a politically exposed group. They had all lent money with the idea that at some point that might get converted into shares. So, but for the first time,
Yeah.
I think the money is going into slightly what you call not very friendly hands from the point of view of the promoters. So that's where we are right now. But sooner or later, something like this was bound to happen.
So there are two questions that comes to my mind listening to what you just said. One is that there's a lot of question about legality of how the takeover actually is happening. Now that the NDTV owners and different stakeholders are actually appealing to the SEBI as we know it, is there a particular precedent in the past which has probably presided over certain instances that we can use as an anecdote to study this particular case? And secondly, I forgot what the second question was, but I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah. No, first thing is in India we haven't seen too many hostile takeovers. So the legalities haven't really have there haven't been too many precedents in this area. Mostly takeovers have come in with the request of the management. So there might be some provisions in the law which says that you need to inform the management that you're taking over or whatever it is, but which they can do even now. I mean, so the issue is not there. So it can get stalled in courts or with the regulator, but ultimately you can't ward off somebody who wants to buy a share that is listed in the market or converted a share that's available for conversion. So whoever has the holding company that has those warrants can convert them into shares. So it's just a question of time and delay. So the promoters can delay things, but they can't ward off this intrusion inevitably unless they get somebody else to buy them.
Right. So you've been in the game long enough to see such instances happening where a severe corporatization of the media has happened in the last 10, 15 years, so to speak. So in that sense, there is always, whenever this sort of an acquisition actually happens, there's always that angle of freedom of speech and how media freedom is curbed and all of that. So how much does that actually impact, say, if Adani takes over NDTV or a Jeff Bezos takes over a Washington Post?
See, I think the overall question of absolute freedom of speech, that ship has sailed long ago in all parts of the media, for two reasons. One is that most not so viable media companies, especially large ones, have indeed had two forms of corporate support. One is either direct through share ownership, or in the form of heavy advertising that is required from corporate things. Either way, corporates are now calling the shots in all media houses, which are a thing. The other parties who are not corporate, who also are calling the shots, is when they are directly politically exposed. Like the vast majority of the say fairly major mainstream media, whether TV or for that matter print, is owned by political parties who have other sources of income and they need the media for their own purposes. Like, for example, you have DMK with an alignment with Sun TV. You have Sakal, which is linked to Sharad Pawar. Lokmat, which has a Congress lensing. You have Inadu, which is linked to Telugu Desam. You have Sakshi linked to YSR Congress. I mean, hundreds like this, So, and Samna, which is Shiv Sena. So, and in Rajasthan Patrika, which is linked, which was once known to be close to Bairon Singh Shekhawat,
Right.
and things like that. So there are two forms of ownership that are coming. One is politically exposed linkages, which is direct or indirect links to a political party that's in power or contending for power. Second thing is corporate ownership. So in that sense, purely independent media that is entirely funded by readers and subscribers and therefore need not be beholden to any corporate house is now rare, both in the US context
Right.
and in India. So I think what happens is, if you want to look for freedom of expression, you have to read two rival media to come somewhere near the truth. You cannot get all the truth from one media. So the
Right.
internal biases of a media house will always be there. The one advantage is that this media house will have an adversarial relationship with the party in power or some other thing. So if you read two opposite kinds of media, you will get somewhere near the truth.
So there is certainly a sense of polarization, not just in the polity, but also in the media space these days.
Yeah.
But do you think this will affect print and television in particular? Because obviously these are big companies which require a lot of fodder in terms of liquidity to sustain themselves, which is perhaps why there is a phenomenon of many people even coming into YouTube. It's a much more revenue friendly model in that sense.
Yeah. See, the fundamental structure of the media has changed from broadcast, that is one venture talking to the readers and viewers in general, to media messaging that goes from top to bottom, sideways, and bottom to top. Because today anybody with I mean a basic setup like yours can actually set up a YouTube channel and start his own publishing, right? He can publicize his views, invite people for interviews, whatever you want to do. So the basic thing is, today the control factor where media broadcasts and talks to viewers has gone for a toss, which means that it is coming from all sides. So it is not just
Right.
top down, it is bottom up and sideways. So people are talking to each other at multiple levels through media. So media is no longer that kind of things. The second thing is mainstream media, which has typically had better controls than let's say individually promoted channels or YouTube or whatever it is now facing the heat in terms of revenues. So, which means that earlier, let us say, if a large media house could support, let's say, an investigation, or it could say send 2 3 reporters to find out what is the truth in a particular event,
Yeah.
that is no longer possible because or it's very rare because it's very expensive to do that, given the level of advertising revenues they get. They can't do that. So which is why if you notice, most TV channels are nothing more than talking shops in their
Yeah.
studio, or in their this thing they call people. So this is the cheapest form of media, where I think there is
Hmm.
no cost to getting people on board to come and talk about an issue. So you only have talking heads programs. Very few where the TV goes with its equipment to the place. I mean, if you want, if you have a flood in Assam, nobody sends anybody there. They'll just catch hold of some local fellow in some studio, and he will talk about it. So I mean, occasionally you will get visuals. So the business of going and searching for news has been more or less given up by large parts of the media. So
And
that's the issue.
so, but also on the flip side, there is another unique phenomenon which is perhaps applicable to only India, which is that although there is a recognition that it's rather complicated and complex to sustain such big enterprises, the number of readers, the number of publications in terms of broadcast news and newspapers, it's not on the decline per se when you compare it to a modern Western society, perhaps where newspapers are almost out of habit and nobody reads it. So why do you think that is happening?
No, see, the overall number of readers and viewers is actually going up. But the thing is, the viewership and readership is fragmented, which means that earlier we started, say, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there was Doordarshan. So all the advertisers had to go through Doordarshan because that's the only way through which you can reach millions of customers all over the country. Then came private channels. Then you had four or five of them, maybe 10 of them. It was still not fragmented. Today, there are literally some 200, 300 news channels, many more entertainment channels, and other things. So you have a tougher time deciding where to this thing. So advertising is going not
Right,
because they don't see TV as a this thing, but because the viewership is too fragmented, and trying to
right.
use the broad channels actually loses you money.
So one of the earlier points that you made is that there are limited options for the Roys at this point, and perhaps it's more sensible for them to pull their cards out right now because the company is profitable for XYZ reasons. And also, you state in your article that was published earlier today, and we'll put the link in the description below for anybody who's watching this who wants to read that article, saying that there is a possibility that a foreign entity can support them, but there is a limitation, there is an upper cap over there as well. So, is that something that's feasible on the long run? Perhaps.
Yeah, see, the only way they can ward off somebody with the resources of an Adani is if they get a foreign investor and who gets to buy 26% or makes a counter bid, right? So it's possible. Say, like, I mean, it's not impossible for somebody like a NYT or a Jeff Bezos to come and put in the requisite resources to buy 26%, you know. So if they do get some foreign shareholder like that, it is possible. But then again, it can get stuck in courts and regulatory mechanism for a thing. Just like they can stall an Adani bid, and Adani can stall a foreign ownership bid through various means, you know. So the our court processes tend to be long. So one can see a long battle ahead for this. It's possible, but their most likely course, if they want to keep the Adanis out of this venture, is to seek a very strong international partner or a domestic partner. But the domestic partners typically may not come in if they think it's a contested bid against somebody with huge resources. I mean, let's assume a group like, say, Hindustan Times wants to get into this, but it's a huge amount. See, the total valuation of a 26% stake will be about 700, 800 crores minimum, at the current price, right? So
Right.
I don't think any business house outside the Times of India has that kind of money to spare
Yeah.
on a 26% stake, not even a control stake. Right. So
Right.
logically, I think ultimately, even if somebody gets in, they would want to take control. If you are a media house, if you are a foreign investors, your horizon may be longer. So I think the best bet is for them to try and find a partner who will ultimately take over, maybe a domestic partner or thing. The other thing is, I don't think the share value can be sustained for a very long period of time. Sooner or
Right.
later, because see, they are not the most popular of channels in terms of viewership, right now. So their valuations are good at this point of time, and if you're not very picky about who you want as a partner, I would say this is the best time to cash out for them. But if they are very picky about their media message and how they want the ideology to be framed for the new owner, then they'll need to get a foreign partner. I think that's their best bet.
But would you say that the fragmentation is happening because there is a sense of bias which is actively acknowledged by the public today? I mean, even the average reader knows that they would go to, NDTV for a certain view that they need to get, and they would go to a Times of India for a different view that they need to get. So, in that sense, is this what you were trying to convey when you wrote one of the articles where you say that these biases actually cancel themselves out? So, when they cancel themselves out, in that sense, the growth trajectory for anybody including NDTV would be limited, because again they're catering to that particular echo chamber that has become their audience.
Yeah, because see, one thing is the polity itself is polarized in multiple ways, both in terms not just nationally but even regionally. So what really happens is the readership now are demanding some degree of affirmation of their own political and ideological inclinations, which is why you have seen so many different kinds of channels and even individuals who have stepped in to cater to various kinds of views of various spectrum. This whole idea that there can be only two views is no longer there. You can have multiple views now, and you can have various slices of ideologies.
Yeah,
So that is so. If anybody genuinely wants the truth, as I said, will have to read multiple media. I do not think individual media can actually provide the whole truth, because it's. I think the assumption that somebody will pursue the whole truth is now gone out of the window. I mean, if you see New York Times,
right,
you will not see any pro-Trump view, even though he represents 45%, or at least he did 45 to 47% of the American public. So
right,
it's as simple as that. And also, partisanship is what gets you subscribership, because people don't necessarily pay for neutral views. They said they like to pay, like for example, Fox News is at one end of the ideological spectrum, but it gets this thing because it has a Christian right wing view. So it
yeah,
all the people who believe in that and pay are willing to pay for it because it reflects their thought process.
yeah. So what
So
can be
it's the same
biased
thing
for one
happening in
person
India.
can be neutral for the other.
Yeah, I mean, partisanship is the key to actually subscription, because if you are
Right.
totally neutral, you may not be having people who are willing to pay top dollar for that.
Hmm. So this is very interesting, because many of these institutions that we see, which are on the decline today, without taking any names, they've held similar views in the past too, and this is a phenomenon that's been seen over the last few decades. So is it temporary political environment which is perhaps enabling that vision in the average audience to see that bias in a particular news channel or a newspaper? Or do you think India in particular and Indian media houses have entered a new phase of journalism, sir?
Well, see, journalism in the way we imagined it in the past doesn't exist. So usually, journalism is now a committed form of journalism where people try to do a certain, based on their ideological inclinations, want to pursue certain kinds of truth that they think is important. So this is what is happening. Nobody really wants to be totally neutral or do what they think is the search for the truth. They want my truth, not your truth. So I think whether you like it or not, people have become partisan now. So if people truly wanted absolutely unbiased news, they should be willing to pay for it, but they don't. And in Indian media scene, nobody actually pays anything for any news. If you notice,
Correct.
very few people actually have subscriptions, and most of the things are free. So in this kind
Yeah,
of a context, how do you, why would somebody pay for something which I don't want to read or which I don't agree with? So it's a difficult situation. Actually, it's true even abroad. It's not just in India. I mean, except maybe in Europe, it is a little more nuanced, but in America, it's highly polarized and partisan, and in India too, it is becoming that way.
right. Do you see an antidote for this coming anytime soon, where the viewer would actually want to pay for, the content that he's consuming in terms of the news, etc.? Is it? I mean, what do you attribute the factors of non-contribution to? Is it because the average viewer feels let down by a section of the media houses, or is it because they generally don't deem worthy of picking up their money and subscribing and paying some media house?
See, that's the problem. That I think the guy who's willing to pay a decent sum for subscription is usually partisan. The person in the middle will always need to be subscribed because he's honestly looking for saying, okay, let me see what is the truth or at least close to the truth, right? Which means the ultimate model that media actually needs to adopt is something like a university or a a charity funded foundation which runs a media house. They can then say, we'll subsidize your journalism. Partly you can earn your keep through subscriptions. The other part, the core part of the journalism, will fund it through a corpus, which will pay for the journalism and other things. Right? This is how universities are funded. Nobody pays fees to the full extent. Part
Right.
of it is funded by alumni, and whether it's a Harvard or whatever it is, and now including IITs and all. A lot of past alumni will come and pay for it. So newspapers and media need to be funded like this, where say a core part of the journalism is funded through a foundation which will pay for core journalism, and the incremental and growth costs come from subscriptions. So unless you do that, you only other option you have is to be politically funded or corporate funded. Those guys have for their own reasons need the media, so they will
Right.
come in because it makes more sense for them to do that.
Right. So, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been absolutely lovely speaking to you. It's always enlightening to listen to you. And there's a huge feedback that everybody is asking you to do analysis show or talk
Ah.
to us regularly on the YouTube channel so that the younger audience can also consume a lot of the content in the video format.
It may not be daily, but I think we can maybe once or twice a week we can schedule something. Huh?
Sure, sir. Definitely.
Yeah,
That'll be a
yeah.
privilege.
Okay.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, sir.
Thanks, Sharon.